The Radeon R7 3060 was a mid-range graphics card by AMD launched on June 18, 2015. Built on the 28nm process and based on the Toblen Go graphics processor. In its Toblen Go Pro variant, this card supports DirectX 12. The Toblen Go graphics processor is an average chip size with a die area of 160mm and 2080 million transistors. AMD has paired 2 GB of GDDR5 memory with the Radeon R7 3060, which are using a 128-bit bus memory interface. The GPU has an operating frequency of 1000 MHz, which can be boosted up to 1050 MHz, and the memory running at 1500 MHz. Before we review this card, we have to get in the system, so taking the side panel off, unplugging the power, and taking my old GPU out, which is a 1050 Ti. Let me know in the comments if you want me to review that. Putting it into an anti-static bag, very important. Putting the new graphics card in, it's a single slot card that supports one HDMI, one DisplayPort, and one DVI port. Putting the side panel back on and booting up the computer, making sure it survived sitting in storage, we can download the drivers, and after a quick reboot, we're into the benchmarks. In GTA 5, running at 1920 by 1080, I have this weird thing where it keeps changing my thing to windowed mode, which makes it not 1920 by 1080. But fixing that, the settings are high and very high. I have not used up all the available video memory. That is to keep consistency. In the benchmark test, we get an average of 43 FPS with a max of 60 and a minimum of 29 FPS. We have those 1% lows of 26 FPS and those 0.1% lows of 24 FPS. Very playable if you ask me. I played the game on this card and I really enjoyed it. Keep in mind, during this benchmark run, I am flying around in a vehicle, but I still do think it is intensive because we are loading in parts of the map. And there is no real frame dips during this. It keeps around 30 FPS. In GTA 5, single player, we average 30 FPS on the board with those 1% of 26 and those point of 24, just like we were seeing before. This game running at this configuration is very playable and you will have no trouble driving around to your heart's content. Here I'm just in downtown, we're just driving around. If you have an old office computer and you're just looking to get into some GTA 5, I would recommend this card because I think it was a very playable experience. And just to play with the game, I blow some stuff up just to see that there is no frame dips with that. On to the next game. In Fortnite, with 1080p, 60 FPS goal with medium settings all around with vertical and motion blur turned off. Fortnite and me have a bad relationship because there's all kinds of stutters, as you can see as we're flying. But overall we average about 30 FPS with a max of 46 and some pretty terrible 1% lows. Now this card was made for esports titles, and I actually had a fun time playing on Fortnite. I had a few kills. So this just goes to show you that you can play this game. It went good until it didn't. Back in Fortnite, running on performance settings with the graphical options set to high and the textures set to low, we averaged 60 FPS. Now this is what I'd recommend for the card. Medium is not bad, but performance will give you more of a competitive gameplay. Just running around the map, we seem to be locked at 60 FPS. This is very playable. On a side note, you notice that my CPU goes anywhere from 60 to 80% CPU usage. This is even without recording with OBS. I think I will probably need a new CPU, and I think maybe the gameplay's been held back by it. In Farming Sim 19, we get close to 60 FPS across the board, except for those 1% lows. Those 1% lows were, 1% lows. I did not notice them. Just going around and playing for a bit, we notice that it still hasn't changed and we're locked at 60 FPS. You could probably play higher settings than this, but I think that this is a good enough FPS. I was not too surprised by this because Farming Sim 19 has a minimum requirement of 2 gigabytes of VRAM. But I feel like it is a very surprising way that it's 60 FPS with not recommended settings, but minimal settings. Recommended settings is 4 gigabytes of VRAM, which I play this game on my 1050 Ti, and it has no issue of playing at 60 FPS on very high settings. In CSGO with 1920 by 1080 with high settings and some stuff disabled just to get that FPS up, we notice that we have anywhere from 50 to 100 FPS. This is very playable and you might be able to do some competitive gameplay with it. Unfortunately, I suck at CSGO and I died 2 times in a row. But on a further note, CSGO is not too demanding and you can run CSGO on usually most laptops. I got CSGO running on a 2011 MacBook Pro before the GPU failed, but it ran at 30 FPS. So that just goes to show you that the hardware requirements of CSGO are not too big. But on a further note, if you want to get into CSGO gameplay, this card might be for you. Just maybe not the CPU, because the CPU is a very awful 50 to 60% utilization. In Fallout 4 1080p medium settings, loading into the game by Swan's Pond, we realize that we have anywhere from 50 all the way down to the low 40s in the FPS range. Despite this, I did not notice those 1% lows of right now 26, but it gets worse as we get over here by the combat zone. After eliminating some raider scums from the face of the earth, we notice that our 1% lows have gone worse. But despite this, it was very smooth gameplay, and if you want to get into some Fallout 4 gameplay that's not the best, but you can still play it, this card is for you. In BioShock Infinite, this is where the card really starts to shine. As you can see, the FPS looks really good. We're getting 60 FPS with some not too bad 1% lows. But games like this is where the card will really shine. Older games will play wonderfully on this card. This, I think, is where the card is aimed for, playing some older games at 1080p. Should you buy the Radeon R7 3060 in 2021? Maybe for esports games? Sure. I haven't tested all the esports games, and I plan to. If you want to see, comment down below and I will play 25 games with this card. But for AAA games, this card, 2 gigabytes of VRAM, just isn't enough these days. So this card is aimed at lower end games like GTA 5 and maybe some light Fortnite gaming. Other than that, this card won't do too well, and most newer APUs might even outperform it for not much more. Thank you for joining me. This has been The Choice Gamer. Leave a like and subscribe for more, and leave a dislike if you didn't. Comment down below if you want to see the 1050 Ti video.